The handcuffs clicked around Marcus Thompson's wrists as camera flashes exploded through the Chicago police station windows. Victoria Sterling pushed through the media mob, her Armani heels clicking against wet pavement, rain-soaked and desperate to reach the man who'd given her everything by offering nothing but kindness. Homeless engineer accused of embezzling $2 million from Sterling Industries. The headline screamed across every phone screen in the crowd. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, except it wasn't irony at all. Detective Sarah Mills slammed the interrogation room door so hard the coffee machine in the hallway rattled. Her partner's face had gone chalk white when he'd seen the evidence files. The same files that made seasoned prosecutors question everything they thought they knew about justice. Victoria's hands trembled as she clutched the worn leather jacket, the same one Marcus had wrapped around her shoulders 6 months ago at a bus stop when she was just another shivering stranger, and he was just another invisible soul the world had forgotten. "Get him a lawyer," she whispered to her assistant, her voice breaking. "Get him the best." But the real crime had happened 15 years ago, and the truth was about to destroy everything they'd built together. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Marcus Thompson's world measured exactly 8 feet by 4 feet. The cramped interior of his 1998 Chevy Silverado parked behind Morrison's warehouse on Chicago's South Side. At 45, the former MIT structural engineer had become a master of invisible living, folding military surplus blankets with precision each morning and storing his few possessions in a tackle box that once held his father's fishing gear. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd designed buildings worth millions while sleeping in a truck worth maybe $800 on a good day. His calloused hands, once steady enough to draft blueprints for children's hospitals, now shook slightly as he counted the crumpled bills in his wallet, $17.32. Enough for Dylan's lunch money tomorrow, but not much else. Dylan, 17 years old, senior at Lincoln High, and brilliant enough to follow his adopted father's footsteps into engineering if Marcus could somehow scrape together college tuition. The boy thought they were temporarily between apartments, a fiction Marcus maintained by showering at the YMCA and meeting Dylan each morning at their usual diner, where Marcus would order black coffee and watch his son eat pancakes neither of them could really afford. "Dad, you're getting too thin," Dylan had said yesterday, those perceptive green eyes, so much like his birth mother Sarah's, studying Marcus with uncomfortable accuracy. Marcus had deflected with a joke about the construction worker diet, but the truth sat heavy in his chest like concrete. He was failing the one person who mattered most. Across town, Victoria Sterling lived in a different kind of prison, 47 floors above the city, in a penthouse that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. At 35, she commanded Sterling Industries with an iron will that masked a profound loneliness, her days filled with board meetings and her nights haunted by the silence of rooms too large for one person. The irony of her success wasn't lost on her either. Adopted from foster care at 8 years old, she'd built walls so high that even affection couldn't scale them. Her adoptive parents had loved her fiercely before their deaths in a car accident 15 years ago, leaving her with a fortune she'd multiplied tenfold and an emotional emptiness she couldn't quantify on any spreadsheet. Her brother Richard, 2 years older and infinitely more cynical, served as CFO and constant reminder that sentiment was weakness in their world. "Emotions don't pay dividends, Victoria," he'd said just that morning when she'd suggested expanding their employee assistance program. But late at night, when Chicago's lights twinkled below her floor-to-ceiling windows, Victoria wondered if there was more to wealth than accumulation. Both Marcus and Victoria moved through their days like ghosts, haunting different versions of the American dream. One who'd lost everything despite doing everything right, and one who'd gained everything while feeling like she'd lost herself. Neither suspected that fate was about to intertwine their stories with a simple act of kindness that would change both their lives forever. The October rain fell like cold needles against the windshield of Victoria's Tesla Model S as it sputtered to a complete stop on Michigan Avenue. The dashboard lit up with warning symbols she'd never seen before: battery dead, electrical systems failing, the heated seats growing cold beneath her designer suit. She pressed the ignition button repeatedly, her manicured fingers betraying the first hint of panic she'd felt in years. "Perfect timing," she muttered, grabbing her phone only to discover the screen completely black. Dead. Like everything else in her suddenly unreliable world of technology and privilege. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see the warm glow of restaurants and shops, but they might as well have been on Mars. Without her phone, without her car, Victoria Sterling, CEO of a $500 million company, was just another stranded woman in an expensive suit getting soaked by Chicago weather. She gathered her courage and stepped into the downpour, her 3-inch Louboutin heels immediately regretting the decision as they met the unforgiving pavement. The rain plastered her honey-blonde hair against her face, and within seconds, her charcoal suit, custom-tailored and worth more than most people's monthly rent, clung to her like a second skin. She hurried toward the nearest bus stop, seeking any shelter from the storm that seemed determined to humble her. 2 blocks away, Marcus Thompson pulled his threadbare jacket tighter as he emerged from the glass tower that housed Meridian Construction Services. Interview number 47 had gone exactly like the previous 46. Polite questions, encouraging nods, and then the inevitable phone call that never came. At 45, with gaps in his employment history that raised eyebrows and references from a life that felt like ancient history, Marcus had become intimately familiar with rejection. The manila folder in his hand contained 5 copies of his resume, each one a small monument to hope that felt increasingly foolish. MIT graduate, licensed structural engineer, portfolio of award-winning designs. None of it seemed to matter when you showed up to interviews in borrowed clothes and couldn't provide a permanent address. The business card the interviewer had given him was already dissolving in the rain, the company logo bleeding into illegible watercolors. Marcus's thoughts turned to Dylan, probably finishing his shift at the campus bookstore right about now, earning minimum wage to help with expenses he thought his father could handle. The boys' college acceptance letters sat unopened in the truck's glove compartment. Not because Marcus wasn't proud, but because he couldn't bear to see the tuition numbers when he could barely afford Dylan's lunch money. The bus stop on Michigan Avenue offered minimal shelter, just a plastic overhang that seemed designed more for aesthetic appeal than actual protection from the elements. Marcus huddled against the back wall, watching commuters hurry past with umbrellas and purpose, their lives organized around schedules he could no longer maintain. He checked his watch, an old Timex that had been his father's, and calculated that the southbound bus would arrive in 12 minutes, assuming Chicago's public transportation was feeling cooperative. That's when he saw her. Victoria appeared through the rain like something from a different world, her business suit marking her as clearly out of place at a public bus stop as Marcus felt everywhere else these days. She moved with the careful steps of someone unaccustomed to walking any significant distance, especially in heels designed for boardrooms rather than city streets. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, and even from a distance, Marcus could see the violent shivering that had taken hold of her slim frame. She ducked under the bus stop's inadequate shelter, breathing hard from her sprint through the rain. Water dripped from her hair, creating small puddles on the concrete, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that Marcus recognized from too many nights sleeping in an unheated truck. She rubbed her hands together frantically, trying to generate warmth, but the thin fabric of her suit offered about as much protection as tissue paper. Marcus found himself staring, not because of her obvious wealth or striking appearance, but because of something far more familiar. the look of someone fighting against circumstances beyond their control. He'd worn that same expression countless times over the past 3 years, though his battles were measured in months and years rather than minutes and hours. The rational part of his mind cataloged the obvious. She could probably buy 1,000 jackets like his without thinking twice about the expense. She had resources, connections, options, everything he lacked. But watching her shiver, seeing her shoulders shake with each gust of wind that found its way under their meager shelter, Marcus felt something deeper than rational thought take hold. His jacket wasn't much. A second-hand olive-green canvas work coat he'd bought at Goodwill for $12, but it was warm and it was dry, and it was the only thing standing between him and the same misery he was watching her endure. In the pocket, his fingers found the small velvet box containing Sarah's engagement ring, the one piece of his former life he couldn't bring himself to sell no matter how desperate things became. The bus rumbled in the distance, its headlights cutting through the rain like tired eyes. Decision time was approaching, measured in heartbeats and the rhythmic drumming of rain against plastic. Without a word, Marcus shrugged off his jacket. The cold hit him immediately, a sharp, breathtaking assault that reminded him exactly why he'd been clutching the coat so tightly. But Victoria's violent shivering had triggered something deeper than self-preservation, some primitive instinct that Sarah had always said made him dangerously decent in a world that rewarded selfishness. He stepped toward the stranger, extending the jacket with hands that were already beginning to shake. "Here," he said simply, his voice barely audible over the rain drumming against the bus stop's plastic roof. Victoria looked up, startled. Her green eyes, the color of sea glass, Marcus thought irrelevantly, widened in disbelief. You don't have to do that," she stammered through chattering teeth, but her gaze was fixed on the jacket like a lifeline. "You're freezing," Marcus replied, gently draping the coat over her shoulders before she could protest further. The jacket swallowed her petite frame, hanging past her fingertips and reaching nearly to her knees. "I've got another one at home," he lied smoothly, the words coming easily, because he'd had years of practice protecting Dylan from harsh realities. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. Victoria pulled the jacket tighter around herself, breathing in the scent of honest work and laundry detergent, something so fundamentally different from the sterile perfection of her usual world that it almost brought tears to her eyes. The fabric was soft from wear, broken in by someone who'd needed it to last, and she found herself wondering about the life it had lived before this moment. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in years. "But you'll freeze without it." Marcus smiled, a tired, genuine expression that transformed his weathered features. "I've been cold before. I'll survive." He folded his arms across his chest, already feeling the October chill seeping through his thin button-down shirt, but something about her gratitude warmed him in a way the jacket never could. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two strangers from different worlds bound together by an act of unexpected kindness. Victoria found herself studying this man who'd just given away his only protection from the storm. His clothes were clean but worn, his shoes resolute but scuffed, and his hands bore the calluses of someone who worked with them daily. Yet there was something about his bearing, a quiet dignity that wealth couldn't buy and poverty couldn't take away. "I'm Victoria," she said finally, extending a hand that disappeared entirely within the jacket's oversized sleeve. "Marcus," he replied, taking her hand briefly. His grip was firm, honest, the handshake of someone who understood that a person's words still meant something. The bus rumbled closer, its headlights growing brighter through the rain. Victoria felt a strange reluctance at the approaching separation, as if this moment of genuine human connection might evaporate the instant their shared shelter ended. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, the kind of card that opened doors and commanded respect. "Take this," she said, pressing it into Marcus's hand. in case you ever need anything. Marcus glanced at the card, his eyes widening slightly as he read, Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Industries. He'd heard of the company. Who hadn't? One of Chicago's most successful renewable energy firms, worth hundreds of millions. He slipped the card into his shirt pocket without comment, though his mind was reeling. He'd just given his jacket to one of the most powerful women in the city. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "I could be anyone." Victoria met his gaze directly. "Anyone wouldn't have given me their jacket." The bus wheezed to a stop, its doors opening with a mechanical sigh. Victoria stepped toward it, then turned back. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked, genuine concern creasing her features. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice to maintain the lie. Somewhere was technically accurate. His truck was somewhere parked behind the warehouse, waiting for another night of restless sleep on an air mattress that had seen better decades. "Thank you," Victoria said again, her hand on the bus's metal rail. "For the jacket. For everything." Marcus watched her climb the steps, settling into a seat near the front where he could see her profile through the rain-streaked window. She was still wearing his jacket, still wrapped in the warmth he'd given freely despite having so little to spare. As the bus pulled away, taking her back to whatever comfortable life awaited her, Marcus raised his hand in a small wave that she didn't see. Alone again at the bus stop, Marcus felt the full force of the October storm. Rain soaked through his shirt within minutes, and the wind cut through the thin fabric like it wasn't there at all. His teeth began to chatter, and he wrapped his arms around himself, trying to preserve what little body heat remained. But despite the cold, despite the certainty that he'd probably catch pneumonia from this act of foolishness, Marcus found himself smiling. For the first time in 3 years, he'd been able to help someone instead of being the one who needed help. For a few minutes, he'd been the person with something to give instead of the person with nothing to lose. The business card in his pocket felt like a small promise, though he couldn't imagine ever using it. People like Victoria Sterling said things like, "If you ever need anything," but they didn't mean it, not really, not when anything included the kind of help someone like him actually needed. Still, as Marcus waited for the next bus that would take him back to his truck and another sleepless night, he couldn't stop thinking about the genuine gratitude in her voice, the way she'd looked at him like he was someone worth knowing, rather than someone to step around on the sidewalk. Maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world, and maybe, for one shining moment, he'd managed to be one of them. Victoria's penthouse apartment felt different when she stepped inside, still wrapped in Marcus's jacket. The familiar luxury, Italian marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, suddenly seemed cold and hollow. She stood in her entryway for a long moment, unwilling to remove the jacket that still carried the warmth of genuine human kindness. When she finally slipped it off to hang it carefully in her closet, her fingers brushed against something in the inner pocket. Curious, she reached inside and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded and worn soft from handling. Her breath caught as she unfolded it carefully, revealing a child's drawing in bright crayon, 2 stick figures holding hands under a crooked yellow sun, one labeled Dad and the other Me. At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "I love you, Daddy." "Dylan." Victoria sank onto her pristine white sofa, staring at the drawing through suddenly blurred vision. This wasn't just a jacket from a homeless man. This was a father's most precious possession, something he carried close to his heart despite having lost everything else. The paper was soft from being touched repeatedly, folded and unfolded by someone who needed to see those simple words of love during his darkest moments. For the first time in 15 years, Victoria Sterling cried. Not the controlled tears of grief counseling after her parents' deaths, not the frustrated moisture that sometimes escaped during particularly brutal board meetings, but real soul-deep sobs that seemed to come from a place she'd forgotten existed. She held the drawing like it was made of spun glass, understanding with devastating clarity that the man who'd given her his jacket had also given her a glimpse into a love so pure it transcended material circumstances. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus was discovering what hypothermia felt like. The walk back to his truck had become an endurance test, each step a conscious decision to keep moving despite his body's increasingly urgent protests. His wet clothes clung to him like ice, and by the time he reached the warehouse, his fingers were too numb to properly grip the truck's door handle. It took 3 tries to open it, and when he finally collapsed into the driver's seat, his entire body was shaking so violently he could barely function. He'd prepared for nights like this over the past 3 years of homelessness, stashing extra blankets and a change of clothes in a weatherproof container. But as he peeled off his soaked shirt with hands that barely responded to mental commands, Marcus couldn't bring himself to regret giving away his jacket. The memory of Victoria's genuine gratitude, the way she'd looked at him like he was a person worth knowing rather than a problem to avoid, was worth a little discomfort. From the glove compartment he pulled out a small tin box containing his most important possessions: a photograph of Sarah and Dylan from happier times, Dylan's latest report card, straight A's as always, and the business card Victoria had given him. By the truck's dome light, he studied the elegant script. Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Industries. Below it, an address in one of Chicago's most exclusive downtown towers. Sterling Industries, he murmured to himself, recognizing the name from news articles about renewable energy initiatives and charitable foundations. He'd probably walked past their building a dozen times while job hunting, never imagining he'd one day have a personal connection to the woman who ran it. The card felt substantial in his hands. Real cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of quality that spoke of serious money and serious power. But what struck him most wasn't the impressive title or company name. It was the way she'd pressed the card into his hand, the genuine concern in her voice when she'd asked if he had somewhere to go. People in her position didn't usually acknowledge people in his, let alone show authentic care for their welfare. Most of the wealthy individuals he'd encountered during his fall from grace had perfected the art of looking through him, as if poverty might be contagious. Victoria, still holding Dylan's drawing, found herself Googling "Homeless Engineers Chicago" at 2 a.m. The search results painted a bleak picture. Professionals who'd lost everything during economic downturns, skilled workers whose industries had been automated away, families destroyed by medical bankruptcies. But none of the statistics prepared her for what she discovered when she hired a private investigator the next morning. Marcus Thompson, the investigator reported 3 days later, sliding a thick folder across Victoria's mahogany desk. 45 years old, MIT graduate, formerly one of Chicago's most respected structural engineers, designed the children's wing at Northwestern Memorial, the affordable housing project in Pilsen, and the Green Building Initiative at Roosevelt University. Victoria opened the folder, her heart sinking with each page. Marcus's professional history read like a success story. Until 3 years ago, when his wife Sarah died in a car accident while 8 months pregnant. The medical bills from trying to save both mother and child had bankrupted him. His attempt to work through his grief had resulted in missed deadlines, lost contracts, and eventually a reputation for unreliability that made him unemployable in his field. "He's been homeless for 6 months, the investigator continued, lives in his truck, works day labor when he can find it, has a 17-year-old son, adopted, not biological, who's currently a senior at Lincoln High School. The boy doesn't know about the homelessness, thinks they're between apartments. What about family, support systems? None. Wife was an only child, parents deceased. Thompson's own family disowned him after some sort of falling out years ago. The kid, Dylan, is all he has left." Victoria studied the photographs in the file. Marcus, in better times, wearing a suit and hard hat at a construction site, accepting an award for sustainable design. The contrast with the man she'd met at the bus stop was heartbreaking. But what struck her most was the consistency in his expression across all the photos, a quiet dignity, a fundamental decency that seemed unshakable regardless of circumstances. "There's something else," the investigator said, pulling out a bank statement. $2 million life insurance payout from his wife's death. Guess what he did with it? Victoria's breath caught. What? Donated every penny to the Children's Cancer Research Fund at Northwestern Memorial. Anonymous gift made 6 months after his wife died. Hospital staff said it was the largest individual donation in their history. The folder slipped from Victoria's numb fingers, scattering photographs and documents across her desk. Marcus hadn't just given her his jacket. He'd given away a fortune that could have solved all his problems, choosing instead to honor his wife's memory by helping other families avoid their tragedy. He was homeless by choice, in a sense, having chosen love over security, compassion over comfort. "Find him," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. "I want to offer him a job." The investigator raised an eyebrow. "What kind of position were you thinking?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring out her office window at the city where Marcus was probably working another day labor job, pretending his world wasn't falling apart for the sake of a teenager who deserved better. "Director of Human Values," she said finally. "We're going to create it specifically for him." "That's unusual?" "So is giving your only jacket to a stranger in the rain," Victoria replied. "Sometimes unusual is exactly what the world needs." That afternoon, Marcus was hauling drywall at a construction site in Cicero when his prepaid phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Creditors had a way of tracking down even the most carefully guarded phone numbers, but something made him swipe, accept. "Marcus Thompson?" The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. "Speaking. This is Rachel Martinez, assistant to Victoria Sterling at Sterling Industries. Ms. Sterling would like to meet with you tomorrow morning if you're available." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. He'd thought about the business card every day for the past week, but had never seriously considered using it. Women like Victoria Sterling didn't actually want to hear from men like him. The card had been politeness, nothing more. What kind of meeting?" he managed. She'd prefer to discuss that in person. "Would 10 o'clock work for you? Our offices are downtown." "I know where they are," Marcus interrupted, then caught himself. Yes, 10 o'clock is fine." After hanging up, Marcus stared at his phone for a full minute, construction noise fading into background static. Tomorrow morning he would walk into one of Chicago's most prestigious office buildings and sit across from a woman who could buy and sell his entire former life without blinking. The question that kept circling through his mind wasn't whether he should go, wild horses couldn't keep him away, but what she could possibly want with someone like him. The Sterling Industries building stretched 47 floors into the Chicago skyline, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun like a monument to corporate power. Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside, wearing the only dress shirt he owned, wrinkled despite his best efforts with the iron at the YMCA, and feeling like an imposter preparing to infiltrate a world where he no longer belonged. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and chrome populated by men and women in $1,000 suits who moved with the confident urgency of people whose time was genuinely valuable. Marcus approached the reception desk, acutely aware of his scuffed shoes against the polished floor, his second-hand tie against shirts that probably cost more than he spent on food in a month. "Marcus Thompson to see Victoria Sterling," he told the receptionist, a polished young woman who looked him up and down with barely concealed skepticism. 47th floor, she said after consulting her computer. "Executive elevators are to your right." The elevator ride felt like ascending through layers of a society he'd fallen out of. Each floor that passed marked another level of wealth and influence, until finally, the doors opened onto a reception area that could have housed his truck with room to spare. Abstract art worth more than most people's homes adorned the walls, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum rather than an office. "Mr. Thompson?" A woman in her 30s approached, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Rachel Martinez, Ms. Annie Sterling's assistant. She's waiting for you in the conference room." Marcus followed Rachel down a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. The conference room, when they reached it, was larger than the apartment he'd shared with Sarah and Dylan in better times. A massive table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than he'd earned in the past 6 months. Victoria was standing with her back to the door, silhouetted against the wall of windows. She turned when they entered, and Marcus was struck again by the paradox she represented. Immense power wrapped in an elegance that somehow managed to seem approachable. She was wearing a navy suit that fit her perfectly, her hair pulled back in a style that was professional, yet somehow warm. "Marcus," she said, crossing the room to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for seeing me," he replied, hyper-aware of his work-calloused palm against her smooth one. "Though I have to admit, I'm not sure why you wanted to." Victoria gestured to the chairs at one end of the table, choosing to sit beside him rather than across from him, a small gesture that somehow made the cavernous room feel more intimate. "I've been thinking about our meeting the other night." "About your jacket?" Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. "It was nothing. Anyone would have—" "No," Victoria interrupted gently. "Anyone wouldn't have. That's what makes it remarkable." She paused, studying his face with an intensity that made him want to fidget. "I had you investigated, Marcus. I hope you don't mind." The words hit him like a physical blow. Of course she had. Wealthy people didn't take chances on strangers, especially not homeless strangers who showed up in their lives under unusual circumstances. Marcus felt the familiar weight of shame settling on his shoulders, the knowledge that his current circumstances would always overshadow any past accomplishments. "I understand," he said quietly, starting to rise from his chair. "I should go. Sit down." Victoria's voice was firm but not unkind. "What I learned made me want to see you more, not less." Marcus hesitated, then settled back into his chair, bracing himself for whatever humiliation was coming next. "MIT graduate," Victoria began, consulting a folder she'd placed on the table. "Summa cum laude, structural engineering. Designed some of Chicago's most innovative buildings, including the Children's Wing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital." She looked up at him. "The same hospital where you donated $2 million to cancer research 6 months after your wife died." Marcus's breath caught. He'd thought that donation was anonymous, untraceable. The idea that someone had connected it back to him made him feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with his current poverty. "How did you—" "Money leaves trails even when people try to hide them." Victoria closed the folder, her expression softening. "You gave away a fortune that could have prevented everything you're going through now. Why?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake where sailboats moved like white specks against the blue water. "Sarah always said that tragedy should teach us something. If we just suffered without learning, without helping others avoid the same pain, then the suffering was meaningless. So you chose to honor her memory by helping other families. I chose to make sure other kids didn't have to watch their mothers die from something that should have been treatable," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "The money wouldn't have brought her back, but it might save someone else's wife, someone else's child." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than professional admiration. This man had faced the same choice that defined every major decision in corporate life, self-interest versus greater good, and he'd chosen sacrifice over security without hesitation. "I want to offer you a position here," she said finally. Marcus blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" "Director of Human Values. It's a new position I'm creating specifically for you." Victoria leaned forward, her green eyes intense with conviction. Sterling Industries has been successful by every traditional metric, profit margins, market share, stock performance. But we've lost something essential along the way. We've forgotten that business is ultimately about people, not just numbers. "I don't understand what you're asking me to do." "I'm asking you to help us remember what matters," Victoria said. "You'd work with every department, sit in on meetings, provide perspective on how our decisions affect real people. You'd help design policies that consider human cost alongside financial gain. You'd be our conscience, Marcus." Marcus stared at her, waiting for the catch, the fine print that would reveal this as charity dressed up as employment. "You want to hire me because I'm homeless. I want to hire you because you chose to give away $2 million rather than hoard it, because you offered your only jacket to a stranger in the rain. Because you've experienced both success and failure and somehow managed to maintain your humanity through both." Victoria's voice grew stronger with each word. "I want to hire you because you understand what it means to lose everything and still choose kindness." "What's the salary?" Marcus asked, his practical side finally engaging despite the surreal nature of the conversation. $150,000 annually plus benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, retirement matching. There's also a signing bonus, enough to secure an apartment and get Dylan enrolled in any college he chooses." The numbers hit Marcus like physical blows. More money than he'd made in his best year as an independent engineer, enough to rebuild not just his life, but Dylan's future, enough to move out of the truck, to stop pretending that everything was fine, to give his son the education and opportunities every brilliant 17-year-old deserved. "Why?" he whispered. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a familiar piece of paper, Dylan's drawing, carefully preserved in a clear, protective sleeve. "Because this was in your jacket pocket. Because you carry your son's love with you even when you have nothing else. Because you gave away the only warm thing you owned to help someone you'd never met." Marcus stared at the drawing, remembering the day Dylan had made it during a rare moment of happiness in their increasingly difficult life. The boy had presented it solemnly, as if it were a contract rather than artwork, saying, "This is to remind you that I love you even when things are hard, Dad." "I can't accept charity," Marcus said finally. "This isn't charity," Victoria replied firmly. "This is the smartest business decision I've made in years. Sterling Industries needs what you have to offer, perspective that can't be taught in business school, wisdom that comes only from experiencing life at every level. You'd be earning every penny of that salary." Marcus looked around the conference room, at the view that stretched to the horizon, at the woman who was offering him a chance to rebuild his life. 6 months ago, he'd been one of Chicago's most promising engineers. 3 years ago, he'd been a grieving widower who chose love over money. Today, he was a homeless man, being offered redemption by someone who understood that true wealth had nothing to do with bank balances. "When would I start?" he asked quietly. Victoria smiled, the first genuine, unguarded expression he'd seen from her. "How about Monday?" Marcus's first day at Sterling Industries began with a knock on Richard Sterling's office door at exactly 8 a.m. Victoria's brother looked up from his mahogany desk with the expression of a man who'd been expecting unpleasant news, his steel-gray eyes immediately sizing up the stranger in the ill-fitting borrowed suit. "You must be our new Director of Human Values," Richard said, not bothering to stand or extend his hand. At 42, he possessed the same elegant bone structure as his sister, but none of her warmth, his face arranged in the permanent expression of someone who'd learned to trust numbers more than people. "Interesting title for someone with your background. Marcus had been prepared for skepticism, but the disdain in Richard's voice carried an edge that felt personal. "I'm looking forward to contributing to the company's mission," he replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. "Our mission is profit, Mr. Thompson. Everything else is decoration." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus like a specimen under a microscope. "I wonder if my sister explained that when she offered you this opportunity." The word dripped with implication, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on his shoulders. He'd encountered Richard's type before, people who measured human worth by net worth, who saw his current circumstances as evidence of some fundamental character flaw rather than the result of tragedy and impossible choices. She explained that Sterling Industries values both financial success and social responsibility, Marcus said carefully. "I'm here to help balance those priorities." Richard's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Social responsibility doesn't pay dividends, Mr. Thompson. Ask any investor whether they'd rather fund a homeless shelter or a profitable energy project." He stood then, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Chicago's financial district. "My sister has always been sentimental. It's a luxury she can afford because I handle the practical matters." The first employee workshop was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Conference Room B, a smaller space that still managed to feel impossibly grand to Marcus. 23 department heads and senior managers filed in with the weary expressions of people attending yet another mandatory corporate initiative, their smartphones and tablets at the ready to multitask through whatever motivational presentation awaited them. Victoria introduced him simply. "This is Marcus Thompson, our new Director of Human Values. He's here to help us remember that behind every decision we make are real people with real lives." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood at the front of the room, acutely aware of the gulf between his second-hand suit and their designer attire, between his calloused hands and their manicured ones. These were people who lived in worlds of abstractions, market shares and profit margins, efficiency metrics and growth projections. The idea that human cost should factor into business decisions was as foreign to them as their boardroom language had once been to him. 3 years ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I was designing buildings that would outlast all of us. I had a beautiful wife, a son I was proud of, and a future that seemed limitless. Today, I'm here because I've learned that none of those external measures of success matter if you lose sight of what makes us human." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus could see the questions in their eyes. "What happened to you? How did you fall so far? Why should we listen to someone who clearly couldn't manage his own life?" "When my wife was dying," Marcus continued, "I had a choice. I could focus on preserving my career, my financial security, my comfortable life, or I could focus on being present for the woman I loved and the son who needed me. I chose love, and yes, it cost me everything I thought defined success." The room was completely quiet now, smartphones forgotten, the usual undercurrent of corporate distraction replaced by something Marcus had rarely seen in professional settings: genuine attention. "I'm not here to lecture you about right and wrong," he said. "I'm here because Miss Sterling believes, and I agree, that a company's true strength isn't measured only in quarterly reports. It's measured in how well we take care of each other, how consciously we consider the impact of our decisions on the people who depend on us." From the back of the room, a voice spoke up. "That's a beautiful sentiment, Mr. Thompson, but this is business, not charity work." Marcus turned toward the speaker, a thin man in an expensive suit whose nameplate read Financial Planning Director. "You're absolutely right," Marcus said. "This is business. And the most successful businesses in history have been the ones that understood that taking care of people isn't separate from profit. It's the foundation of sustainable profit. The workshop continued for another hour, with Marcus sharing stories from construction sites where he'd seen teams accomplish impossible things when they felt valued, and boardrooms where he'd watched brilliant strategies fail because they ignored human factors. Slowly, grudgingly, the room began to engage. Questions were asked, experiences shared. And by the time the session ended, Marcus could see something shifting in their expressions, not wholesale conversion, but the beginning of curiosity. Richard Sterling watched from the hallway as employees filed out of the conference room, their conversations more animated than usual, their body language suggesting they'd encountered something unexpected. His jaw tightened as he observed the small clusters forming. People who rarely spoke beyond departmental meetings now engaged in discussions about workplace culture and employee welfare. This homeless interloper wasn't just disrupting their established order, he was making people think. And in Richard's experience, thinking employees were dangerous employees, prone to questioning authority and demanding changes that threatened the careful control he'd spent 15 years building. Something would have to be done about Marcus Thompson. Soon, the photograph arrived at the Chicago Tribune's investigative desk on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside an unmarked manila envelope with no return address. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. Victoria Sterling, CEO of one of Chicago's most successful corporations, kissing a man in work clothes outside a modest diner on the city's south side. The accompanying note was typed on plain paper. Sterling Industries CEO's secret romance with homeless ex-con. How much company money is she giving him? Richard Sterling sat in his office 3 hours later, watching the online metrics climb as the story spread across social media platforms. The photograph, which he'd commissioned from a private investigator, was doing exactly what he'd intended. Sterling Industries' stock price had already dropped 12%, and his phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from concerned board members. Damage control, he murmured to himself, already crafting the narrative that would paint Victoria as emotionally compromised and unfit for leadership. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, coming just weeks before the quarterly board meeting where several members had already expressed concerns about the company's soft new direction under Victoria's humanitarian initiatives. Marcus discovered the media storm when his prepaid phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "Dad, are you famous? Kids at school are showing me pictures online." The diner where he and Victoria had been meeting for coffee suddenly swarmed with reporters, their cameras and questions turning his quiet breakfast spot into a circus. Marcus tried to leave through the back exit, but a young journalist with ambitious eyes cornered him in the alley. "Mr. Thompson, is it true you're romantically involved with Victoria Sterling? How much money has she given you? Are you taking advantage of her charitable nature?" The questions hit like physical blows, each one reinforcing Marcus's deepest fears about his relationship with Victoria. He'd always wondered if people would see him as opportunistic, a gold digger who'd manipulated a wealthy woman's sympathy for his own gain. Now those whispered doubts were being broadcast across Chicago's media landscape. "No comment," he managed, pushing past the reporter toward his truck. But the damage was already spreading. By noon, every major news outlet in the city was running variations of the story. Homeless man and female CEO, romance, or con game. The comment sections filled with speculation about Victoria's judgment, Marcus's motives, and the appropriateness of their relationship given their vastly different circumstances. Victoria called an emergency board meeting for Thursday afternoon, her jaw set with determination as she faced the conference room full of skeptical faces. Richard sat at the far end of the table, his expression carefully neutral despite the satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "I assume you've all seen the news coverage," Victoria began, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that lined her face. She'd spent the past 48 hours fielding calls from investors, board members, and journalists, all questioning her judgment and demanding explanations. "Victoria," said Margaret Chen, the board's longest-serving member, "we're concerned about the optics of this situation. Sterling Industries has built its reputation on stability and sound decision-making. This relationship raises questions about your judgment. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to run this company," Victoria replied firmly. "Our quarterly numbers speak for themselves. We're ahead of projections in every department." "The stock price suggests otherwise," Richard interjected smoothly. "We've lost nearly 20% of our value since this story broke. Investors are nervous about leadership that makes decisions based on emotion rather than logic." Board member James Harrison, a silver-haired man who'd known Victoria since childhood, leaned forward with grandfatherly concern. "Victoria, dear, no one questions your business acumen. But this man's background, the homelessness, the obvious financial disparity, it creates an appearance of impropriety. What if he's manipulating your generous nature?" Marcus, who had been asked to wait in Victoria's office during the meeting, could hear the raised voices through the conference room's thick walls. Every word felt like confirmation of his worst fears, that his presence in Victoria's life was damaging everything she'd worked to build. He pulled out his phone and typed a text to Victoria. "I'm resigning, effective immediately. I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for." Before he could second-guess himself, Marcus sent the message and quietly left the building, ignoring the security guard's confused expression as he surrendered his access card at the front desk. Victoria felt her phone buzz during Richard's impassioned speech about protecting the company's reputation. She glanced at the screen, and her blood went cold. "Excuse me," she said, standing abruptly and cutting off Richard mid-sentence. "This meeting is adjourned." "Victoria, we haven't finished," Margaret began. "Yes, we have." Victoria's voice carried a note of steel that made the entire room fall silent. "I founded this company on the principle that business should serve humanity, not the other way around. If you've forgotten that, then we have nothing more to discuss." She was already moving toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of someone who'd made an irrevocable decision. Behind her, Richard called out, "Victoria, think about what you're doing. Don't let emotion destroy everything Father built." She paused at the doorway, turning back to face the room full of concerned faces and conservative suits. "Father built this company to help people. Marcus Thompson embodies everything Father believed in: integrity, sacrifice, putting others before yourself. If you can't see that, then you don't understand what Sterling Industries is supposed to represent." Marcus was already back at his truck when Victoria's car pulled into the warehouse parking lot, her usually pristine appearance disheveled from her frantic drive across the city. She climbed out of her Tesla and approached his vehicle, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "Don't you dare," she said through his open window. "Don't you dare let them win." Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm poison to you, Victoria. Every day I stay makes things worse. Your stock price, your board, your reputation, I'm destroying everything you've built." "They're destroying it," Victoria corrected fiercely. "Narrow-minded people who think love should be limited by bank account balances. People who measure worth by net worth." "Maybe they're right," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe I am taking advantage of your kindness. Maybe." Victoria yanked open his truck door and grabbed his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Do you love me?" she demanded. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that would determine the course of both their lives. "Yes," Marcus whispered, the word carrying 3 months of growing affection, shared conversations, and the kind of deep connection he'd thought died with Sarah. "Then that's all that matters," Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't care about the stock price or the board or the media. I care about you. I care about us." and I'll be damned if I let fear destroy the best thing that's happened to me in 15 years. Marcus stared into her green eyes, seeing determination mixed with vulnerability, strength tempered by love. For the first time since the scandal broke, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this storm together. The truth unraveled on a cold November morning when Detective Sarah Mills knocked on Victoria's apartment door at 6 a.m., her badge catching the hallway light like a small silver promise of justice finally served. Behind her stood Marcus, his face pale with a mixture of vindication and devastating sorrow, clutching a manila folder that contained 15 years of buried secrets. "Ms. Sterling," Detective Mills said, her voice professionally gentle, "we need to talk about your brother Richard and the death of Sarah Thompson." Victoria's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor as the detective's words penetrated her sleep-fogged consciousness. Sarah Thompson, Marcus's wife. The woman whose death had set in motion the chain of events that led to Marcus sleeping in his truck, to their meeting at the bus stop, to everything that followed. "I don't understand," Victoria whispered, though part of her already did. The pieces had been there all along: Richard's inexplicable hostility toward Marcus, his panic when the media attention intensified, his desperate attempts to discredit and remove the man who threatened something far deeper than corporate stability. Detective Mills consulted her notepad with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd delivered terrible news many times before. 3 years ago, your brother's business partner, Thomas Morrison, was driving drunk after a Sterling Industries holiday party. He struck Sarah Thompson's vehicle at the intersection of Madison and Wells, killing her and her unborn child instantly. The words hit Victoria like physical blows, each detail another crack in the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her family, her company, her life. She sank onto her sofa, the same pristine white furniture where she'd first cried over Dylan's drawing, where she'd made the decision to find Marcus and offer him a job. "Richard covered it up," Marcus said quietly, his voice hollow with the weight of truth finally spoken. "Morrison was drunk, but he was also negotiating a $50 million deal with Sterling Industries. Richard couldn't afford the scandal, couldn't risk losing the contract, so he bribed witnesses, falsified police reports, and made sure Morrison got away with murder." Victoria's hand shook as she processed the magnitude of Richard's betrayal. "How long have you known?" "I suspected something was wrong from the beginning," Detective Mills answered. "The accident report had inconsistencies, witness statements that didn't match physical evidence, toxicology results that disappeared from the file, a reconstruction that made no sense given the damage patterns. But every time I tried to investigate further, I hit bureaucratic walls. Someone with significant influence was protecting Morrison." Marcus pulled a photograph from the folder, his fingers trembling as he placed it on the coffee table between them. It showed Richard and Morrison at a bar 2 weeks after Sarah's death, both men laughing, champagne glasses raised in celebration. The timestamp on the photo read 3 days before Sarah's funeral. "The private investigator Richard hired to discredit me found this in Morrison's personal effects," Marcus said. "Morrison kept souvenirs, trophies. He was proud of getting away with it, proud of having Richard Sterling as his protector." Victoria stared at the photograph, bile rising in her throat as she recognized her brother's face, saw the casual indifference in his expression while Marcus had been planning his wife's burial. "He let you suffer," she whispered. "He watched you lose everything and said nothing." "He did more than that," Detective Mills continued. "When you hired Marcus, Richard panicked. He couldn't risk exposure, couldn't chance that you might discover the truth about the accident, so he escalated his campaign to remove Marcus from your life and your company." The detective produced another folder, this one thick with evidence of Richard's systematic sabotage, emails to board members questioning Marcus's background, payments to journalists for negative coverage, even attempts to plant evidence of financial impropriety in Marcus's personnel file. The media coverage, the board pressure, the questions about Marcus's motives, Richard orchestrated all of it, Detective Mills explained. He was willing to destroy both of you to protect himself. Victoria's phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the suffocating silence of revelations. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment she considered not answering. Then anger, pure, clarifying rage, swept through her like wildfire. "Where are you?" she demanded when she picked up, her voice deadly calm. "Victoria, thank God!" Richard's voice crackled through the speaker, tight with panic. "I just heard that detective has been asking questions. You can't believe whatever she's telling you." "I can explain." "You killed Sarah Thompson," Victoria said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long she wondered if he'd hung up. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had changed, becoming the cold, calculating tone she remembered from their childhood when he'd been caught in some transgression. "I protected this company," he said. "I protected our family name. Morrison was drunk, yes, but he was also our biggest investor. $50 million in renewable energy contracts, Victoria. $50 million that built the foundation for everything we have now. Everything we have is built on a woman's grave," Victoria replied, her voice breaking with emotion. "Sarah Thompson and her unborn child died because of your cowardice." "She was already dead," Richard snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Nothing I did could bring her back, but I could still save our company, still protect our employees' jobs, still honor Father's legacy. I made the practical choice, the responsible choice." Marcus stood up slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "The responsible choice would have been justice," he said, loud enough for Richard to hear through the phone. "The responsible choice would have been letting Morrison face the consequences of his actions instead of letting an innocent man lose everything." "You lost everything because you're weak," Richard snarled. "You gave away $2 million that could have secured your future, all for some sentimental gesture to honor a dead woman. I saved this company while you wallowed in self-pity." Detective Mills stepped forward, her hand resting on her handcuffs. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to come in for questioning. We have Morrison in custody and he's talking. We have the bribery records, the falsified reports, and testimony from witnesses you thought you'd silenced." The phone line went dead. Richard had hung up, but Victoria could already hear sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached the Sterling Industries building where her brother was probably even now destroying evidence and preparing for the legal battle of his life. Marcus sank back onto the sofa, the weight of vindication and grief settling on his shoulders simultaneously. After 3 years of carrying the burden of unanswered questions, of wondering if he could have prevented Sarah's death somehow, he finally knew the truth. She had died not because of random tragedy, but because of deliberate choice. Richard's choice to value money over justice, corporate reputation over human life. Victoria reached for Marcus's hand, intertwining their fingers as they sat surrounded by the debris of revelations that would change everything. Outside, Chicago was waking up to another ordinary day, unaware that one of its most prominent businessmen was about to be arrested for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, or that the love story that had captivated the media was actually a tale of justice delayed but not denied. Sometimes life breaks us down to nothing before it builds us back up into everything we were meant to become. Marcus Thompson lost his wife, his home, his career, everything that defined him as a successful man. But when he gave his only jacket to a shivering stranger on that rainy Chicago night, he discovered something more valuable than any fortune: the power of unconditional love and second chances. Victoria Sterling had all the money in the world, but was starving for genuine human connection. Together, they proved that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in moments of kindness, in choosing love over fear, and in the courage to stand by each other when the whole world questions your choices. Their story reminds us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to choose compassion over comfort, and never too late to find the love that makes all of life's struggles worthwhile. At any age, in any circumstance, we can still be the person who offers their jacket to someone who needs warmth more than we do. What act of unexpected kindness changed your life forever? Have you ever had to choose between security and love? And what did you learn from that choice? Share your stories below. We'd love to hear how kindness has touched your life.